if we're really trying to do something that makes a difference, it can take a huge toll on us. And the question to ask ourselves for filmmaking is, are we willing to pay the price? If we want to be a great storyteller, are we willing to pay the price?
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this week, we're welcoming back one of our first guests on the podcast, Jeff Gibbs. Jeff is a film director, writer, producer, and composer. His 2020 film, Planet of the Humans, has been seen by over 25 million people and generated over 100,000 comments. Jeff was a producer and composer for the Academy Award-winning Bowling for Columbine, the first film he ever worked on, and the Palme d'Or-winning all-time box office record-holding Fahrenheit 9/11. Welcome back to the Green Root Podcast, Jeff.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for your inspiration and continuing the fight through the years and the tears and the whatever we all go through: bankruptcy, divorce, losing our hair. I gotta wear this hat. Losing our hair. All these hazards of the job we've assigned ourselves, of being legends in our own minds, of planetary saviors. But yeah, thanks. And I'm here because you sent me a note, asking about kind of filmmaking tips for whatever we're going to call ourselves. And, it's one of my strong areas of interest is kind of trying to help people make better documentaries, whatever that means, and better content. And you're a content creator, so to speak. In fact, I see that buzzword on everybody's, I peek in at Facebook and it's like everybody, 2/3 of the people on there now are content creators. So welcome to the world where the number one job of everyone is to create content for everyone else to look at.
I know. I don't adopt that term personally, but
I know.
I guess that's what it is.
You're doing videos and of various length right now. And were you in any other feature films besides Planet of the Humans?
No, my movie stardom has yet to take off. I'm not sure why that is, but yeah. So no, I have not. But like you said, even though I consider myself a writer and I do environmental organizing, I have been doing more film clips and little film. And so obviously we have this podcast here, which is film content, whatever. I've been just taking clips and putting those out there on social media. They've been doing pretty well. So I've been doing other things like just going in the forest and talking with my phone about a dead log or whatever. And more importantly, I've been getting other people to do that. So it's not just my voice all the time, which I'm sure people get tired of because I'm certainly tired of listening to myself. So putting stuff out like that and actually have a really short film that's out, should be out by the time this podcast is out on the Green Root Podcast YouTube, or you can go to eco-integrityalliance.org. It's a very short film about a hunter, and maybe we don't agree with hunting, but he has concerns about this fake wildfire pretense logging that has, in his opinion, destroyed his hunting ground. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective to have, an unusual one maybe in the so-called environmental community. So I've been dabbling more in that, and I realize film is very popular. So before getting into tips, why do you think, I mean, this is kind of a obvious question, but why do you think film is so much more popular than the written word?
That's a very good question. And yeah, film is still the coin of the realm in a sense. I mean, we live in a very fractured society, culture, civilization where I'm astounded. When Planet of the Humans came out, very few feature length, 1.5 to 2 hour films were getting even 100,000 views. That was rare, much less millions. But now I'm like the content that has 100,000 views or 1 million views and an artist that has millions and millions of followers, it's like we've never even heard of. It's a very more and more visual and auditory culture. Um, but it's still, I'm still a big advocate for making documentary length films for a couple of reasons. Um, they're still kind of the coin of the realm, right? It's still something that can get people talking, perhaps even more so than books. Books have kind of lost, there's so many books out now that it's even hard to keep track of us. Like I had this idea that humans are susceptible to delusion, and that's both our downfall and our superpower, right? I've had this for a while, even while I was making Planet of the Humans. But so I'm like, wow, who else has had this idea? You look up and there's half a dozen books been written about this topic that I'm thinking, who's written about delusion as a human superpower? And so, but films still, they also do something that books can do. And if a film is done right, it does it even better. Well, it does it differently than a book. So the highest goal that you can achieve with a novel, a nonfiction book, or a long form, feature film or documentary is to have people disappear into this world. And that's very difficult to do with the short form content, very difficult to do with the world of YouTube and social media because we watch it on the small screens. But the long form has a way of engaging people and having them disappear into a story that shorter form things do not. And that has a chance to be transformative because stories are still they're our operating system. Without stories, we could have never invented a hammer, or an arrow. Somebody had to imagine what would happen if I did this, and with this, or what would happen if I took this and put a handle on it. Uh, Somebody had to imagine 20 things that weren't going to work before they got to the thing that was going to work. And so fiction also binds us together as cultures. And that's one of the things, as much as there was a bottleneck when there were only 3 TV channels or a few newspapers or a limited supply of books, the common things that we heard and, when everybody watched Roots, when I was in college, that was a big moment in the culture. It's like the first time the Black experience in an African family had been seen by everybody and kind of changed their experience. The day after the anti-nuclear film, the day after, which showed what would happen if a nuclear war started, and it centered in, I think, Lawrence, Kansas. Very graphic for the time that it came out. There was a before and after, and even Ronald Reagan attributed that film to driving him to communicate to basically reduce the number of missiles with the Soviets. Rachel Carson's book, there was a before and after her book came out. What I'm blanking
Silent Spring.
Silent Spring.
Mhm.
Um, there's other films like Bowling for Columbine was the first film I worked on, as you mentioned. Um, it didn't perhaps achieve its mission, direct mission of reducing gun violence. It happened at a time when gun violence then started to explode, but which brings to something else that great films, whether documentaries or feature, can do is they get people talking. And so one of my things I'm really a fan of creating experiences in which people have a chance to change, and both because of the facts that they absorb, but more importantly because of the story they have absorbed. So I think I'm talking about you're talking about making videos, and videos serve a great purpose, even if they're only content based, like taking us somewhere we haven't seen, hearing from somebody that we wouldn't usually hear, giving us information about a situation at hand. But you've already discussed one of our rules for approaching film successfully, which is that almost always people that we don't agree with are more interesting than people that we agree with. I've had friends that went to make a film by hanging around peace activists for weeks. They actually went to a foreign country and spent, I don't know how much money there. At the end, it was like, we don't have anything. And part of the side note to that is we as activists and leftists, and sometimes we forget that to be personal. I think sometimes the right has more of a get into your life kind of thing. We can be a little bit remote from each other and not, hopefully that's changing a bit, but I learned a lot when I was, they're not necessarily in the film, but I have several arborists that I met with that really understood what was happening with the trees. And yeah, my job is to cut them down, but that's just my job. I actually am learning and want to save trees, but and then several of them told me, but the law doesn't actually allow me to save them in certain situations. But and it's the listening skills of going out and being willing to encounter people that we wouldn't usually talk with and see what they have to say, and going to learn, not just that we're gonna, we may find something that our beliefs confirm, but one of the hardest things for us is to go ahead and be open to our beliefs being disconfirmed. And one of the things I discovered in Bowling for Columbine, being the first film, was, if you watch the film, right in the middle, Michael's standing there with the father of a Columbine victim, and they're going, "What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? Why are we like this?" Right after a sequence where you see Americans killing each other at far higher rates than any other nations, developed nations in the world. What is it about us? And not going to the usual things of if we just banned guns, that would solve the problem that you would expect him to solve. So, yeah, I'm really happy to talk about this and to consider, what do you have any films that really change your perspective or long form works that you feel like impacted the world, Josh?
That's a good question. You mean in terms of nonfiction documentary or fiction?
Either one, but yeah, and documentaries like, I mean, one for me, you don't even have to like a whole film, but I think the first um, 20 minutes of Koyaanisqatsi
Oh
is,
yeah.
is one of the most, just shakes you up. And the ending too, the middle, it kind of goes on. If people haven't seen it, it's very powerful music and images that just it takes a while to even grasp what's happening here. Philip Glass's first major film score.
Yes. No,
That
that one was
that's
actually
one.
very impactful. Yeah, I guess I have to admit, even though I do watch a lot of documentaries, I try to watch one every week, some format. My days of my mind being blown seem to have passed. Maybe it's because I'm drawn to the content that I already know. So I'll watch these films that reconfirm. The thing that's just coming to mind right now, which isn't as relevant, is watching some old war documentaries. So for some reason, those are really interesting just because I I try to picture myself in those situations. Would I go? Is this just things like that? So so I guess I can't speak to one that just completely blew me out of the water. Although I will say recently there was an environmental film that I did find very valuable called Greenwashed, either Greenwashed or Greenwash. And it brought up a lot of the stuff that we, enviro nerds have been talking about for years, which is how so much inside the supposed pro environmental movement is either weak sauce, nonsense, or the opposite of true. So I was really impressed by the fact that it was getting out there very widely and it was probably saying things that weren't said before. I mean, it wasn't particularly new for me, but I watched that. I said, this is extremely valuable, an extremely valuable tool. And as a writer myself, I tend to focus on the written word. That's actually how I learn best. I'm not as good at just hearing something and absorbing information. Visual, definitely, but for me, for some reason, the written word. But I have to acknowledge I am anomalous in that regard, and I very much do appreciate film. And last thing I'll say on that is I probably have been more impacted, I guess, by fiction because for some reason that's the storytelling in that regard. It's sort of what it can do is it disarms me, right? When I'm hearing about a particular nonfiction subject, I'm kind of like, all right, I know what I'm getting into to a fictional story, I don't know where I'm going. And so it can sort of trick me into experiences I wouldn't have otherwise. So that's why I still write fiction, but I see the extreme value of these nonfiction documentaries and particularly that long form over short form, which is why I wanted to ask you. So, do you feel as if people even have attention spans enough for long form? I mean, I know people don't really read anymore. People will listen to audiobooks. I count that as reading, but I think it's harder for people to absorb that. So, I guess it's a two-part question. Do you feel like people can handle that? And what is the difference in what they're getting out of a short clip versus a longer work?
It's a great question. Yeah, and let's come back to the writer thing in a minute. But I think, we have to ask ourselves, and I've never done this, when we're proposing to make a long form, feature documentary, um, could we even make a 1 minute piece that captures people's attention? How about 5 minutes? Do you know anybody that can write a short story that's world class or a novel? Very, very few. How about a symphony? How many of us could compose a symphony? But yet, all those skills are kind of required to make a great film. But somehow we get in our minds we can just set out and make a documentary, and it's which is good. We need the ego, but let's follow up on this too. But ego is actually the enemy of making good art. You've got to have a great ego, but it's going to part of the reason that I don't I'm okay with most documentaries I see, but if I'm being honest, they're not great films, and that's partly I wanted to have these conversations. Is that the bar is in the wrong place. The goal that they're seeking is the wrong um, goal in a sense. But to answer your question about attention spans, quickly name the most popular podcaster in America.
Is it?
One of them.
I guess Joe Rogan is.
Let's just say Joe Rogan. How long are his podcasts?
Yeah, they're pretty damn long, hours.
Pretty damn long, an hour, 2 hours. If so, I think sometimes we say things to ourselves because it's storytelling is both what humans do and it's really difficult. Another things that, so when we say to ourselves, people won't watch long things because you know what? Yeah, people don't want to see anybody dunk the basketball, right? Well, that's because we can't dunk the basketball, but they do. If you can dunk the basketball, they want to see it. If you can figure out how to tell a great story, people are going to stick with it. Whether that's just two guys talking, smoking cigars in a dumb little room, talking about ancient aliens and whether bears can kill lions, or whether it's, a film. So the we also tell ourselves things like, "Oh, great works of art are not finished; they're just abandoned." No, they're not just abandoned. Um, when you've produced something that's just when it settles in. And sometimes you don't know until people start reading it and you have to put it aside for a while and all those things. But um, it's making any film, I give anyone credit who's done that, and making a film that's really, again, is not, the film that you mentioned that you liked, it's got a lot of information that you like that's coming at you. But I'm going to guess you didn't have this swept away feeling like you just were in another world that you didn't want to be woken up from, you know. And that's got to be the mission for any film, documentary or not. And so one of the Michael's sayings forever has been, "Don't make a documentary, make a movie." And now there's a downside to that in today's world. What that means is exactly what you said about writing, uh, fiction work. Is it in a documentary? The tendency is, well, what is your movie about? As soon as you're making a documentary about something, it's over. It's boring. It's done. That's it. Unless it's like about Woodstock is occurring, or you know, I've got the inside track on something that where we've never been. By the way, I mentioned Woodstock because if you want to see what I think is the best, even though it's a music documentary, the cameras weighed 150 pounds and whatever they weigh, I don't know, 30 pounds. So people couldn't wing them around. So they let the action pass through the frame and developed one of my rules, which is like because the cameras are so portable now, it's like hold the shot for at least 10 seconds. Um, 30 seconds is better because everybody's just the camera around. But um, in a documentary, you have to be on a genuine journey of discovery. You have to have a question that you don't know the answer to, or a situation where you don't know the outcome. Um, and I've seen people go to a lot of effort to make documentaries that were fairly successful, but they didn't know how the story was going to turn out, but they still included like the high point, like where we knew what was going to happen at the beginning just to get people's attention. It's like, no. And here is one of the problems with making a longer form film. You've got to find a way to pull people in through the first couple minutes and then through the first 20 minutes about the point where people are going to turn it off. You're going to give a movie maybe 10 to 20 minutes and then you're going to turn it off. You got to find a way to intrigue people and pull people in without giving away your most powerful thing in the film, without telling people. When you watch movies from now on and TV, you'll see that over and over again, they don't trust their story. So they begin with the most, dramatic thing that happens, right? Or they begin with at the end. They'll show the person like in the midst of this fire or things blowing up, and then they'll work back. Well, they only did that because they don't actually know how to get you into the story without giving away the most powerful, which kind of ruins it a little bit. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of why I'm doing this is like writing is the essential skill of documentary filmmaking. One of my uh, jokes is I used to say if you know what a rack focus is, you might be a film, you don't know what it is. So that's a good sign. If you know what a director is somebody who knows what rack focus is, but wouldn't. It's where you change the focus from foreground to background from one character to the next, and it's a great thing for fiction films, but you know, in documentaries, if you're trying to be too clever like that, it really actually takes away from it. So the situations where you're going out with your phone, I would hope that you're filming like this, not like this. They've
Well,
conditioned us to film like this, and I have a theory about that.
well, unfortunately, with the social media apps like TikTok, you that's what they want you to upload.
Well, it would require you to edit it. You can edit it to be the other way. So,
That's true.
um, yeah, and it's going to be a little less resolution. So they've created a dilemma for people. My theory is when it's like this,
Yeah.
they can put ads on the side. See?
Yeah.
So they've got us into this world.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this, what's the difference between what do they call this? In your
Landscape.
camera,
Landscape.
right? So this means it's all about the humans, right?
Portrait.
All you
Portrait.
got room for is the face and the body.
Good
It's all
point.
about us and then the ads. And the next thing we want to feed you. And the next thing to click on are on the two sides over here. Wonderful.
Now
Wonderful.
that's really interesting. So the idea is if you have it up vertical, yeah, you're focused on people. If you're doing an environmental film, you are literally talking about the landscape. So it should be encompassing in the landscape, and this narrow cropping out almost denaturizes it and it makes it all anthropocentric. So that's really interesting.
It is awkward. I myself have filmed stuff like with the camera facing upside, because they don't make it easy to hold it this way. My finger gets in there and all this stuff. But um, if you think about it, when you've got the portrait or the landscape, immediately you want to click on full screen, right, where it takes up the. Um, but when it's like this, there isn't full screen is meaningless because you got black bars on the side. Uh,
Yeah. And you can
so
also have other apps running on your computer. So it's almost like this distraction thing. Like, oh, yeah, I'll look at this for a few seconds, but this more immersive. Yeah. For the short film I did, I definitely did the landscape version. because it was meant to be a little bit longer form, whatever, even though it's only 6 minutes. But still, for the clips, I tend to do the upright. But I'll consider more of what you're saying about that. That's totally
Let
valid.
me give you a couple of other thoughts about that too, because there isn't the kind of films, if you watch Planet of the Humans and you see the other films I've worked on, um, we do use a lot of archival, a lot from people who just stumble upon stuff. Um, yes, if you don't film like this, it really can't be used in a movie. So you're documenting the world in a way that's precluding having a really, you know, a cinematic impact later in the stuff that you're collecting. I was talking to some other forest activists out west who are trying to protect the old growth that's being logged both in Alaska and British Columbia. Unbelievable that what 1,000-year-old trees are still being unfucking believable. But my suggestion is, Josh, to consider this for, I don't know what they're running now, but the Panasonic Lumix cameras, I think um, some of them are full frame, some of them, um, there are cameras that shoot in open gate, what's called open gate. So, um, there it's more of like instead of the squeeze, it's more of it's like closer to a square. And if you shoot in open gate, you can still get like it's like 6K. So you can still get a full resolution vertical out of there. And you can get the 16 by 9 out of there too. So Panasonic makes some cameras that do that. And Canon just came out with an open gate. And one of their cinema camera does. They might be a couple $1,000s. But the other issue with filming with your phone, and maybe you tell me about how you're getting your audio.
So it depends. So if I'm doing the clips, I'm just getting the native audio, but I have this Rode mic here that uh actually I think this was the one you suggested I get, but this was, maybe 15 years ago. So it may be obsolete, but I'm cheap and I haven't bought a new one. So even though a directional mic isn't even the mic you're supposed to use for podcasting, I do. So I did that. So if I actually have a subject to record like I did for that hunter film, I did use that directional mic. It seemed to
Oh,
come out okay.
great. They
Well,
do make little kits that plug into the phones, little tiny that plug right into the phone, and a little light that will attach. I think Rode makes those too. And so that's one option. But one of the things I want to emphasize, whether it's you, and I'm sure you're doing this, or other people, is I've seen way too many filmmakers just getting far away, too far away, whether it's with a camera, phone, whatever. And it's amazing, like this distance for audio versus just this distance, like a foot or two,
mhm.
makes a huge difference. And I always use personally, and on Planet of the Humans, we used a wide angle lens on prosumer cameras, so a couple $1,000 cameras up $4,000 or $5,000 cameras, um, and put the mic right on, on top of the camera. And with the wide angle, you're going to be able to get closer, and it's still going to look natural and good. And with the not at wide angle, you're going to be back here to get the space, but just that distance makes a huge difference. Another thing, I know this people who study film, people are going to say, "Oh, we already know this," but I just want to say this because a lot of people have ruined their content with this. So let's say, you know, I'm interviewing you, but it's amazing how many people, the camera person is like way off to the side, right? Okay, seems like fine, and I remember feeling that feeling when I was first starting to film. I took one cable access class when I was working out bowling for Columbine to learn how to use a camera. You kind of don't want to intrude, you don't want to get in there, but when I was working on, I went on tour with the Dixie Chicks and Mike Desjardins, who is one of our shooters for our films from Detroit, sports guy. But he was like bumping me in the shoulder. He was like, holding this at the time heavier camera. I'm like, what's going on? And what I realized is he was trying to get that camera right. You don't want the person to look in the camera, but you want them to be looking as close to looking in the camera as they can be without actually looking into it. And the reason for that is if the camera is over off to the side, right? When you're listening to two people talk, right? The interviewer and you're off to the side, how do you feel? You're at a party and you're off to the side looking. You're outside looking in, right?
Yeah.
So you're here, you're part of the thing, right? They're talking to, so it's getting as personal as possible. And all fiction films, if you think about what they're about, if you go to Netflix, HBO, um, Amazon Prime, anything right now, you're going to see out of 1,000 movie posters, 999 of them are going to have people's faces on them.
Mhm.
And so that's the eye. You want to be able to see right into people's eyes, which brings me to another pet peeve I have is that so many, when you watch documentaries now, and there's the History Channel documentary, which isn't really a documentary. It's meant to be like, you know, did did the asteroid destroy the dinosaurs? They'll set up a question they already know the answer to, but they can be intriguing, but you never feel anything. I hate to say it, even David Attenborough's Our Planet, they're wow, but you never feel a thing
Mhm.
because you know why? Because David Attenborough's not in them. Who do you see? It's why Koyaanisqatsi can wear on you after a while, even though it's one of the greatest films ever made, because it's remote. There's not no people speaking. There's no narrator. So it's about so many films now. They get somebody talking, and in fact, you don't even see them. You see all these things, whatever the person's talking about, and then a minute later, you see the person for a second, right? And then they go back to these things, the elephants going across the plains, the trees being chopped down, whatever it might be, the mining, and basically they're using the interview as like narration of a sort, and just using images to cover that. But when you do an interview, when you're out there in the forest with this person, you're there to listen and hear somebody tell a story. Again, you can like or hate Joe Rogan, um, but that's just two people sitting there talking, and people stay with it for hours because they do a great job of capturing and their spontaneous reactions, and you can see their eyes and you can hear their voice well. So I'm just a big fan of people that are out there capturing stuff. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by only doing the vertical if you can help it. Help me out by getting this other form too at the same time. But here's something that people don't think of is think about finding a way to place yourself in the setting. And because if you don't do it, you can't change that later. It's very difficult to do. But a little could go a long ways uh, of you being present. You know, too much ego, right? Really wanting to be in your film is not, or your video is probably may not be healthy. But choosing to introduce it, choosing to be there for a second, choosing to help us with your voice or narration, you can always cut yourself out later. But if you don't make the choice to include yourself in your documentary or your video, then you don't have the option in the edit room, and you don't have the option for the historical record as well. Because we got to think of what we're doing as trying to capture a story, but it's also the historical record, right? You've now got footage of this, whatever's happening. So, rule number 6 in our list of 100 rules for not making a documentary, making a great film, is you should consider being in your own documentary. Rule number 7 is, God forbid, you should want to be in your own documentary, because that can go south too. And then rule number 8 is just a little bit goes a long way, so you don't have to get two cameras covering yourself all the time. But and now when I first realized how important that was, part of it came from Michael saying in a documentary, in a, in a fiction film, you build in the reaction shot, right? So often the reaction shot, the person watching the horrible thing happening, is more powerful than the horrible thing happening, right? And whatever horrible is happening, if you don't have the reaction shot, you have nothing, quite often. So in a documentary, the director, the writer being present in the film is the reaction shot, is you're holding our hand, you're there watching it. The other thing, it's more honest because there's no such thing as a completely subjective story. Why are you there? I remember seeing it, I don't know if it won the Academy Award or not, but a documentary shot in India. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but we never figure out why you were there. What is this about? How did this journey get started? So it's more personal, and there are many. Even if you're making videos, there are a lot of YouTube channels that don't really have the um, the narrator in them, but I think most of the very successful ones do. And at the time I was breaking a documentary filmmaking, I was starting to think about, Michael's films, Super Size Me, Religulous, more recently, My Octopus Teacher. You think about the films that really grab people, Planet of the Humans. Was like, very early on, it's like you're taught in film school to remove yourself and try and make it objective. Um, but that's, I think, a big mistake for documentaries and for nonfiction storytelling that people, I can understand it, but it's a little bit like you want to be an artiste too. You want your art to tell the story. It's like, no, you have to tell the story. So, anyways, so and I'll just wrap up the part about, yes, you should make a film, seek to tell a story in which people can't figure out what you're going to say. You don't know the twists and turns. And the best way to do that is for you not yourself not to know how this is going to turn out. And so that's where you actually have an advantage because you're a writer and doing this, whether you realize it or not.
That's all great stuff there. This is super helpful, not just to me, hopefully to other folks out there, because filmmaking is more accessible than ever. As you say, that results in a lot of not so high quality stuff. So this is the way to make it more high quality. I would say writing is more difficult than most people for most people, and a lot of people just don't really even attempt that, especially with AI. But I think everyone has at least you know, panned a camera over something. So whether they want to take it to that next step and turn it into art, like you say, and I want to ask two more technical questions, but first maybe a brief interlude of a film that I guess I did watch it a long time ago, but jogged my memory in terms of one that really stuck out for me was Grizzly Man, so Werner Herzog. And it wasn't necessarily because I agreed with all of the way it was portrayed or anything anyone did in the film or Werner Herzog's perspective, but what was really I think captivating about it was well, first of all, I didn't know the story. I guess yes, there's the to use another version of the word grizzly. There was a grisly component. I like horror, so it's something to do with that. But it was really a touching human interest story, which whether we like it or not, kind of as you alluded to, if we want to do environmental films, humans are drawn to humans. So there has to be that human component in it. And what was weird about Grizzly Man, and I want to hear any commentary you have on it, is so it was a film about a guy making films, which is very meta. And imagery was, of course, beautiful. We have Alaska landscapes, we have incredible footage of animals, probably in situations where he shouldn't have gotten that close, and then the terrible story behind it. But I actually think the piece that did stick with me most, aside from the music, because the music was also really amazing, composed by Richard Thompson, who is a well-known UK musician. But anyway, was the touching component of the frailty of Timothy Treadwell's humanity. So even though it was a nature film, it was kind of about his persona and his, so it wasn't a clear cut. This is a pro-environmental film, an anti-environmental film. Was he even properly pro-environmental? All of that messiness to the point where I remember when I was living in Oregon and I proposed it for this sort of radical film night, environmental film night. I had some other environmentalists say, no, we can't show that film. I'm like, why? He's like, because he didn't do great. I'm like, I know we're exploring this topic. It doesn't have to be some purity of whether the person had done it perfectly. Let's explore these ideas and let's critique it. Anyway, do you have any thoughts about Grizzly Man or any of the stuff like that?
I just couldn't watch the end. I'm very sensitive to violence in films, and I know I had a
Yes.
few seconds in Planet of the Humans, but yeah, it's a personal story, and not something we would recommend anyone engage in. And yeah, whether it's he's,
No.
but it's a story in which you didn't know how it was going to turn out and where it was going. And it's interesting you say that it's a beautiful film because I don't remember what year it came out, but it was almost certainly shot on cameras that would be, not nearly as good as even your iPhone anymore. And I just want to encourage people to use the best tools available to you. But that's a good example of how that was the era of video cameras, right? And handy
Yes.
cams and that kind of thing. And the downside to aspiring to make a Hollywood film, a fiction film that's gotten out of control is that everybody wants to shoot their documentaries on cinema cameras and they want to get, I've been watching these videos. How to shoot your interview? It's like get, this camera, that camera, three cameras, like six lights, 14 people. And it's like, yeah, sometimes some of the productions had way too many people around, but by almost everything was shot with a single camera. The films scenes I've been involved with that have made movie history, one camera 95% of the time. That's it. So that film meets for you and people that liked it, um, you know, the it pulls you in. And there's another film which some people may have different reactions to, but it's Cave of Forgotten Dreams, also by Werner Herzog, and you get to go somewhere where you've never been before in this cave that they've found in France with how old are they? 30,000-year-old cave paintings, and it's just it's which it meets another rule. Take us to some where we wouldn't usually have access,
Mm.
and so that's if we're making a film, however well intentioned, about people doing activism. It's kind of like we have to. Everybody has to be willing to be a little bit more real, right? Warts and all, and we're not all perfect, and we may have dark moments. I'm not saying, look for the dirty laundry necessarily, but in my next film, I may, um, and certainly if I was writing, but in Planet of the Humans, you see this homestead I built in the woods, right? Log house, and I kind of didn't go as where with it what where I wanted to, and I think I will probably will next time around. But here I am, Mr. Nature, right? I wanted to get back to nature, try and find a different way to live, get off fossil fuels. And so I bought 20 acres of land in the wilderness. What's the first thing I needed? A chainsaw.
Right.
So what's the second thing I needed? Well, it's a little bit rugged out there. Better bring in that bulldozer that, I hated when I was a kid, to make the driveway and to dig the. It's just like, so I think the warts and all with Timothy Treadwell or um, with my own story, or don't you find that with writing novels that whether it's fiction or nonfiction writing, the dangerous part is are you willing to talk about things that people normally don't want to talk about? Do we want to reveal things
Right.
that are inside of us that where has have you hit that moment with your writing where like, do I really want to
Well,
go there?
I will never admit that it has anything to do with me personally, but I do know that there are pieces that I sometimes shy away from thinking about, oh, what will they say? Whether it's family members or people who maybe have a very strict ideology. And I realize that's the that's the area that I do need to navigate because it is touchy. And of course, there are repercussions for that, right? If you make a character doing certain things, they're like, well, that's bad. I'm like, yeah, the character, this is a horror novel. Like you want them to be pure and good, like they're gonna die probably anyway. So yeah, I agree that that's where the magic is in those uncomfortable pieces. Unfortunately, we're in a climate where the gatekeepers will often discourage or even censor that. And if you put it out there, you can get attacked for it. But that's the risk of being the artist, right? You just have to do it anyway.
Well, let's kind of go there for a minute. The risk of being an artist, the another thing when I was gearing up to make Planet of the Humans and I just so people know, I gave up, a career of living in New York, had an apartment in New York, nice terrace and place back here, and I just decided I can't do this. Even as important as political films and other people's environmental films were, I'd been I just basically quit and moved back and lived in the back room of my sister's house and spent all the money I could put together to work on Planet of the Humans. And I started thinking a lot about stories that made a difference. And um, one of them was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
Mm.
It was the first novel I'm aware of that, not novel, nonfiction book that actually dove into the lives of two serial killers. And and now it's not so radical, but at the time, to discover that these killers had these traumatic backgrounds that led them to this horrible slaughter of this family was a breakthrough. But Truman Capote, I don't think he ever recovered from that. He became drinking problem. He also had Harper Lee actually helped him write that book, the author, and so that's another secret. This is, please seek help. The idea that you can make a great movie in your head by yourself is as ridiculous as you can compose a symphony and play every instrument yourself and record it yourself. Not going to happen. Um, almost, then he didn't live that much longer. He never did anything great again. Hemingway, how did Hemingway, the great author Hemingway, wind up? Committed suicide. Um, you know, what, making a great work of art is a very, can't, I think we know a lot more about taking care of ourselves these days than we did, but it's a tremendously dangerous thing. And I think you can see the danger and stress reflected in, if you watch for this, watch in documentaries, especially when there's emotion or news clips, it gets cut away from. They get cut off, right? I saw an editor sitting for the first time, and this is why, if you really want to be a great filmmaker, documentary, put yourself around people who've delivered it this at the highest level. You're going to learn X amount from your friends and buddies, but you need to be around people who've. So I'm sitting there watching Kurt Engfer, my fellow co-producer of Fahrenheit 9/11, just turn all this dialogue into just a few motions and just stay with somebody that's just feeling something just for a second longer, even just slow it down in a way nobody would know, just for a second, just to linger. But you watch how often you'll see, especially in documentaries or nonfiction, they just cut away, cut away, cut away. Because the editor, the director, the producers, they don't want to really feel it. Who wants to sit there and watch um, over and over, even though it's only a few seconds in the film, these animals be fed into a machine to create biofuels. I mean, I don't know if that's what they were using these animals for, but it's the same process of, by the way, yes, this is a true thing. Animal fat, along with trees, are still a thing for green energy. It's still a thing, including ancient forests. Unbelievable. But who wants to sit there and figure out how much to linger with that? Who wants to sit there in Fahrenheit? There's a beheading that happens really quick by the Saudis. It passes so fast it doesn't affect much, but we had to sit there in the edit room, right? Watching that. So Heath Ledger died after playing the Joker. of an overdose. I may be getting the exact thing a little bit wrong, but Jack Nicholson, who had played the Joker earlier, he played the Joker in one of the Batman films. Jack Nicholson's reaction was, "I warned him that playing that role would so affect you that it was going to be difficult to come out of it." So, Planet of the Humans, I don't know if you got any backlash, but here's another good rule. If you piss people off and people are upset. No, that's not the goal. My goal with Planet of the Humans was I actually thought the dialogue would start. That's why I went to Bill McKibben and Van Jones and RFK Jr. and all these people. I just thought the that we shouldn't be incinerating forests in the name of green energy was so obvious. They would all just go, what their brains would just instantly go, I should agree with them, right? They didn't. They didn't. They couldn't give up their so that took a toll on me. Okay, I'll say this here. We're among friends, but I wound up in the hospital 3 days later. Now, I've been going through other things, losses, terrible losses, stresses in life. I came from the poorest neighborhood in Flint. Actually, I grew up just outside of Flint because we were too poor to live in Flint. Uh, but that just, that hope that I had and them um, kind of like laughing it off almost. Took a toll on me. So, and maybe you can talk about this with your activist work. I don't know even if that's a word, but you're fighting to save the planet, and I think there's a big overlap here. If we're really trying to do something that makes a difference, it can take a huge toll on us. And the question to ask ourselves for filmmaking is, are we willing to pay the price? If we want to be a great storyteller, are we willing to pay the price?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Do
I
you
mean,
ask yourself that for your work defending the planet?
yeah, I mean, I frame it, I'm speaking for what the ecosystems and wildlife would say. I don't know if I'm effectively defending or protecting the planet, but yeah, it takes a toll. Honestly, it's not the toll of speaking in their voice. It's not even the toll of engaging in the issues. It's the brick walls that I constantly come up against, and then the undercutting from so many who one would think would be allies, whether that's in media, other environmental groups, et cetera, and then just the sheer corruption of the bureaucracies where they are so deep in their own garbage that they see any opposing viewpoint as a threat and you can't even get a toehold. So I would say that's more the issue. For me, fiction is my fiction writing and any of those creative pursuits. I find that to be the release of that. So it's almost the excretion. So I'm releasing the toxins from my skin or out my ass, however you want to look at it. So for me, that hasn't been a as yeah, the art making for me is like that's the thing I would like to do exclusively. And yes, I think there are potentially tolls taken there. You go deep into the psychology. I wrote a novella years ago that dealt with experiences with my grandmother's Alzheimer, but I have to say the art part is the redemption and yeah, the organizing and just the activism. And frankly, the worst part I found about the art stuff is just the dissemination and going through the gatekeepers. So maybe I just have a disposition where that it doesn't necessarily impact me
Mhm.
to that degree. At the same time, I'm not a full-time novelist, and maybe that would impact me more if I was.
Well, just as I'm going to contradict myself by saying I think both things are true, that you have to be aware of the toll that it takes.
Right.
But one of the best Earth First sayings was, action is the antidote to despair.
Yeah.
And there's something about even filmmaking and writing, it's a form of action, and the art can be very cathartic.
Right.
I think you put your finger on it in the domain that I'm operating and you're operating. And with Michael, I went through this with his films too. It's like when Bowling for Columbine came out, it was completely controversial. People had attacked it. Not all the for Bowling and Fahrenheit, the right not all the left came to our defense. Michael was his life was threatened. So that's the part that's not fun, especially when our own people who should be our allies have went down this path way farther than what we thought. That's really sucks. But there's no more beautiful moment than when you're sitting there with your film and seeing it for the first time on a larger screen and the sound mix and you're hearing it with the music. There's some joy to like this interviews that you're doing. If we approach this with the other important skill, more important than knowing how to use a camera is listening skills, active listening, and really genuinely wanting to hear people's stories. Even people like, if you watch Planet of the Humans, I wanted to have a good conversation with them, and all the greetings they passed quickly were with friendship, or familiarity at least. But people like to be listened to. And when you ask, well, why did the Michigan militia and James Nichols agree to appear in Bowling for Columbine? Well, because they got listened to. And that James Nichols interview was 4 hours, the brother of the Oklahoma City bomber. But he was exactly like our cousins, the same kind of person. So, um, yeah, I think there are many benefits to sitting at home and just taking it is the worst option of all. So,
Yeah, engaging for me, maybe it's a compulsion, but the last thing I'll say about that, because I do want to ask you a couple more technical
sure.
questions before we wrap up, because yeah, I think people are going to be eating this up. This is just such important information from somebody who's a master of his craft. But so what I was thinking about in terms of almost that paradox of it is unpleasant to whether it's the activism, there's an unpleasantness, there's also sometimes maybe in the art creation, but then there's a relief. It's sort of like puking when you have to puke, right? You're like, I don't want to puke. This is going to be unpleasant. This is going to let me just do it. Then once you puke, you're like, oh, why didn't I do that earlier? So there's a little bit of both involved, and there's kind of that the only way out is through. And so there's going to be difficulty. You can't be a wuss, right? You can know your limits. You have to know your limits, but
Yeah, the only way out is through. I mean, that's become a commercialized saying, but that is true. And the healthy person comes to learn and to discover. And I have my hunches and my values for the next film, but I'm definitely going to learn. And one of the things I wanted to mention, just so I don't forget it, is that if people made it this far, I'm just collecting the names of people who are doing filmmaking at whatever level around the country, whether it's just if I need some help or maybe, you know, a longer term relationship, shorter term, just whatever it might be, or just comparing notes. People may have footage that I'm interested. I don't know. So, um, you know, we can share in the when we post this my email. But I'd love to hear from people and connect. This is one of my passions is also helping people, make better documentaries because hell, the more I talk about, the more I'll learn because, there's no given that my next one's going to be any good. Just, got to, I need help just like everyone else to make a great work of art.
well, so if people are listening and they want to get in touch with Jeff, you can contact us at the Green Root Podcast. You can just go to Green Root Podcast at proton mail.com. I'll have the way to get a hold of us that way. And yes, that's a great offer for people who maybe they would have stuff to contribute for your film or whatever. But the last two pieces I wanted to ask are about music and writing. So let's maybe start with music and then so the score and then finish up with writing. So how important is the score to filmmaking?
Well, one of our sayings is sound is more important than picture. If the picture is messed up, you'll sit there. If the sound is messed up, you're going to be in pain and you're going to run to the back and say either fix this or I'm leaving. If the, so the natural sound, the environmental sound, is critically important. It's also of a form of narration in a sense. If you think about it, sound is what brings you into a space, not the sight. We've got it reversed in terms of our own physiology. If you cut off on the sound, you're kind of can be lost. So the music is very important, but it's kind of almost like a subject for another
Sure.
day. But it's yeah, so much to say about music, but the main thing is sometimes less is better. And um, the, the most helpful rule I can think of is that if you overdo the music, it's a sign you don't trust your film.
Yeah.
In real life, there's no music when the most dramatic things happen, right? So that kind of fits documentaries a bit. But music um, it's also another form of narration. Sometimes um, we go opposite of what you expect rather than, sad on sad. So um,
Right.
yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah, of course, that's a vast topic, and as a musician myself, that's something really interesting trying to incorporate that into
And finding instruments that
film.
don't interfere with voices that are in the film is really important. Guitar can be hard. Piano can be hard.
Yeah, yeah, it's percussive. Right, that makes sense. As opposed to strings and more
Well, it's in
ambient.
that middle octave, right, where the voice is. Um, it's guitar is a lead instrument.
Right. That's a good
So
point. No, that's a great point. Yeah, thanks for that. And so the last piece, writing. So I'm a writer. I consider myself a writer. You're a writer as well. Anyone who makes a film in some way is going to be a writer, whether it comes to the narration or you're an editor, which is a kind of writing of the interviews. So what maybe like yeah, just any brief thoughts on that? How that would maybe differ from writing fiction? Is
sure,
that the
there's
same thing? Yeah.
one of the main ways is that it's actually in some ways more difficult to write a quote unquote write a documentary because if you could plan your documentary out from the all the way through, it's going to come across like a History Channel or a nature documentary or a science show, something like that. So you have to have the skills of writing, and especially when you're in the edit room and when you do the narration. But the difference is you can build the twists and turns in your novels, right? Or in a film. You have to discover them in the process of filmmaking when you're a documentarian. So that makes it actually a little bit more dangerous because if you could explain the whole story before you start, it's probably not, that's could be wind up being boring. So um, that's you need the writing skills, but it's like if you had to, yeah. So um, you have to discover those twists and turns, um, you know, and very few, um, which means that it could take a lot longer to make your documentary than you think.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's sort of counterintuitive. You think, oh, this is going to be simple because it's just this topic. And then writing a novel is going to have all this complexity, but you can really orchestrate everything in that novel pretty easily. You're God there. In a sense, in this, you're with a documentary, you're less God. It's almost like found footage that you're interacting with your world and you have some influence over it, but maybe like a lesser God, like a forest God that can sort of influence things locally instead of a a
Like
Yahweh.
if we're making a film about forest activism, I'm talking about as a filmmaker here, not a um, nothing else. But you're following forest activists. What do we learn about them that we weren't expecting to learn? What are the outcomes that we don't know? Are they going to go to prison? Are we going to discover that some of them are from very wealthy families? I once gave an Earth First person a ride home from an event, and she said, "Can you drop me off at this timber industry estate? I live in one of these little houses because that's my grandfather." The twists and turns that we wouldn't expect. Will some of the families that make a living from logging be more sympathetic or have some wisdom that we wouldn't expect? Can we go there?
Right.
So,
I think that's great advice. Absolutely. So yeah, encourage people to check out Planet of the Humans if you're not part of the 25 million people who have already watched it. If so, watch it again, leave a comment. Yeah, lots of good engagement, lots of good controversy with that film. And keep in mind, you don't have to agree with every single thing. That's the way people seem to be these days. Like, well, there's a part that I don't agree with, therefore that film shouldn't be shown. It's like, listen to yourself, you know? So getting that out there, it's still going out there. That's amazing. And I was grateful to be a part of that, talking about biomass energy and the concerns with, is it a good idea to cut down forests and burn them for energy and call it clean energy? Seems pretty obvious, but since then people have caught on. But when that film was being made, I mean, that's what helped turn the tides on that, is we were asking these questions and no one wanted to hear from us, but we asked them anyway. So thank
Yeah,
you for that.
and that's something we can point to is two things you said they're critically important. Creating discussion is the highest bar. I've went to see great movies and walked out with somebody and we had nothing to talk about. So maybe it wasn't so great. But having people discuss your film is actually the best goal. Not that you convinced them of how right you were about your main points.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't want to discuss it. They wanted to silence and censor it and attack people, but that's the time we're living in these days. But the last question I wanted to ask you ties into the premise of the Green Root podcast, which I always ask my guests about, which is, what would you feel like is a root of the eco crisis?
Well, I think there's only one route, human overshoot. There's we're a single species, right? And how many we're a large omnivorous species. How many grizzlies should there be on planet Earth for a healthy planet? Would you be comfortable with 1 million? How many should be in Colorado? How many people are in Colorado? 10
Uh,
million.
Maybe something like that.
Michigan's 10 million. What would life be like with 10 million bear? It wouldn't. We get upset because there's 500 wolves in Michigan. Oh, there's too many. But by overshoot, I also mean consumption. And I was careful to mention both in Planet of the Humans. But yes, whether it's industrialization, greed, capitalism, we can point to many aspects of this, but the raw, um, you know, the fact that there are 10 times more people than there were 2 centuries ago, and our consumption is 10 times higher, leads to a total human presence of 100 times greater than it was. So a lot of the fights specifically that we're engaged in, we should engage in, right? Whether it's overfishing, whether it's deforestation, but essentially, I don't believe we can solve. Our numbers are going to come down. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be through planning or it's through some kind of crash. Um, and I don't think we're going to be happy if it happens through a crash at all. So, um, it, I, that's a short answer, and for some it might be controversial, but I just think that's the baseline. Is that we're a species that should be numbering in not 8 to 10 billion, and our consumption is literally, well, you can, what would you call the global, is it, you call it GDP, the global gross domestic
Gross
product?
domestic product.
Yeah, it's got to be thousands of times greater than when we were Stone Age humans, and probably several hundred times greater than maybe 1,000 times than when civilization started. So, it's probably 200 or 300 times higher than when the Industrial Revolution started. So, what version of that is sustainable? Let's say solar panels, nuclear, whatever, actually did what was promised. You know, producing enough of these for 8 billion people is game over. Doesn't matter.
Well, thanks, Jeff, for all that and for everything and your great films and the great films to come. And thanks for coming on the Green Root podcast.
Thanks for having me. And yes, on that happy note, we'll go back out and hug a tree.
The point of this podcast is not to give people reassurances, it is to inspire them and activate them to engage. I guess if people want to sort of do a Tom Bombadil thing where you just go off into the forest alone and just separate from everything, guess what? Sooner or later, they're going to come for your forest too. So you better engage now before they do.
Where I lived in the woods, that's exactly what happened. And they logged right next to somebody that had ran to the woods. And coincidentally or not, he committed suicide the next year, thinking he had left into the wilderness. But Yeah, and that's the last thing I'll say about life in documentaries. If you're going to try and force a happy ending into your documentary or solutions, it's probably going to suck. It's going to take away from what you just tried to build. So just tell the truth and go from there.
I love that. Well, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Josh. Great to talk to you.